Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, great. We'll wait maybe a few minutes just for I think other brother. I'm expecting other people as well. Right. So I think only one person, Sister Kotha. Right. I think you weren't here last week, yeah? I only had like 3 brothers last week, so I'm guessing you weren't here. So what I'll do then is this is part 1, and I did a lot of this PowerPoint on Saturday. Yeah, so maybe I'll go over what I did last week very quickly, and if the brothers join, then I can continue, if that's fine. Yeah, is the voice clear? Because I had to buy new headphones just now. Forgot mine somewhere else. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. So one of the first week when I did controversial questions, I tackled what did I do? Oh yeah, why suffering in the world and how do we explain suffering from an Islamic point of view? Last week I started this: is Islam compatible with democracy, and what is the role of an Islamic state? So democracy is the populist way of doing things in the modern times. So, and people ask, is democracy allowed in Islam? Do people have a view? Are they allowed to speak? Are they allowed to criticize governments? Are they allowed to choose their own leader, and so on? So this is a question that's worth answering and taking our time looking at the sources of Islam, what the scholars of Islam have said, both historical and modern. What's their point of view on this? So, is Islam compatible with democracy? Right. So, Islam and politics. So, the relationship between religion and politics in Muslim societies has always been a focus of debate between Muslims. Okay, scholars of Islam. What is the role between the normal common Muslim and their ruler? Some view, and some have cited that Islam has no role in politics at all. So what's the standpoint? Some view Islam as simply a religion without the right to govern or to order the daily affairs of human life. So some view it as a very pacifist religion that has no role in governing people. Rather, it's only there to facilitate personal issues with regards with the human being. Okay, so they see Islam as having no role in politics. This is, some Muslims do hold this, and they're what we call secular Muslims, and they believe Islam should only be kept at the home in private life without going into the public sphere. Others, however, view Islam as not only a religion but also as a system and a social order encompassing all spheres of human life, including the state and the law. But I would say majority of Muslims do not hold the first view, but they hold the view that Islam is there to facilitate personal and public life. And when we tell non-Muslims that Islam is a way of life, well, we don't necessarily just mean we don't just mean politics, or we don't just mean our personal affairs, but it encompasses everything. So these Muslims who claim Islam has a place in politics, they base their argument on the Quran and point out the political connotations of many of the Quranic terms. So they use to justify their position that Islam has a role in politics by mentioning that there are words in the Quran which speak about leadership and governance, like al-mulk, tabaraka alladhi biyadihi al-mulk. Blessed is the one who in his hands is all dominion. So the word domination is used in the Quran. Ummah is used in the Quran. A community, a nation is used. And on other political terms, okay, like for example, sultan. Okay, sultan is used in the Quran. And it means authority and rule. Okay, and it's there to donate the government many times in the Quran. Hukum is mentioned in the Quran to govern and to judge. Okay, so like governors, rulers, and judges. وَاحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ. Rule with them what Allah has revealed to you. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ. And whoever does not rule by what Allah has revealed, then فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. They are the kafir. So the word hukum is mentioned many times in the Quran, 250 times in fact. And each time the word hukum is used, it's referring to political. It's in political terms. So, for example, the Quran says to the Prophet Muhammad we have وأنزلنا إليك الكتاب بالحق لتحكم بين الناس بما إنا أنزلنا إليك الكتاب بالحق لتحكم بين الناس بما أراك الله. We reveal to you the book with truth so that you may judge. See again, tahakkum, hukum is used here. Tahakkum, to judge among people by that which Allah has shown you. Okay. So again, this is again referring to the fact that the Quran, the Islam in general, the Sharia has a political side of rulership and facilitating public life of the human being. Okay. So and I use here the names of prophets without saying alayhim salam, not out of disrespect, but because this is meant to be for non-Muslims. So if you want to have it and share it with your non-Muslim friends or whatever, then it makes it easier for them to understand. Okay, so Dawood alayhi salam and Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, they're leaders and judges by virtue of their divine appointment. Hence, they possessed complete judicial power. Right? They had power to judge between people, and they could not have done that except if they were political leaders. However, this command for them does not mean that they judge and rule on the basis of their own wishes. Okay, why? Because وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَى. So one of the things that Muslims believe in is that the Prophet, whatever he would command, whatever he would say and do, is direct revelation, and is not from his own self. Okay, their rule must be based on the text. Even the Prophet is commanded to follow the Sharia. Okay, وَاتَّبِعْ مَا يُوحَى إِلَيْكَ مِنْ رَبِّكَ. Follow with what Allah has revealed to you. Okay, and it's not for the Prophet to make up rulings without Allah's permission. That is for Islam, a text of the Quran. So the Quran is the guide for the Prophet and it's a guide for his ummah. The relation between religion and society is not confined to what is commonly termed as rituals. So people, groups of Muslims who emphasize politics, like Hizb ut-Tahrir, for example, they would argue that rituals are part of Islam, but they're not everything. And what's more important is rulership, because rulership defines the society, defines the community. So the relation between religion and society is not confined to what is commonly termed as rituals. Okay, it's actually a social contract between the governor and the law. Okay, between law and the human affairs in general. Okay, and I'll come to explain that later on, when governance is not based on making up laws, but just applying what the Quranic injunctions are. Okay. So religion came with its ethical insights and eternal vision to correct and harmonize society. So that's what Islam is there for. It's there to correct the ethics and morals of the community. Islamic law does not separate. So we've got a new brother here. Abdul. Yeah. So welcome, brother. So Islamic law does not separate religion from daily life. Yeah. Islam does not separate religion from daily life. It does not separate religion from politics. So there are rulings in Islam for everything. And one of the Jews of Medina, this is a hadith in Riyadh Salihin, came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, he came to the companions and he said, you know, your Prophet is teaching you even the minutest details. And they said, yes. They said, even using the bathroom, he told us what are the etiquettes of that. So even when it comes to our personal affairs, how we enter the mosque, how we leave the mosque, how we enter our homes, what du'as we recite, these are things that are taught by general groups that teach Islam and ritualistic things. So why shouldn't why shouldn't Islam have anything to say about politics if it's talking about even the minutest details of bathroom use and how we sleep and how we wake up and how we eat? Surely, if it tackles these minute issues compared to governance, then it must have a say in politics. So it does not separate religion from politics. It does not separate politics from morals. So one of the things that we suffer from today is immoral leaders, people who have no judgment and no ethics to how they would judge people and how they would act towards them. Okay, it's all just benefit and interest. And Islam does not separate morals from the state. Right? Islam does teach morals on a personal level, but it teaches also the morality of a state in general, how it deals with its non-Muslim neighbors, how it deals with its own Muslim neighbors. There are etiquettes. So Islam is involved in politics. Now we have to establish this first. Islam is a system for a practical human life in all its aspects. Okay, so Islam is a system for all aspects of the human life. Islam professes an ideal and convincing concept that between the Creator, nations, the universe, and all of life and all mankind. Islam, in the Quran, teaches the relationship between us and the rest of the creation of Allah. Okay, everything is dealt with. Our relationship with our neighbors, relationship with animals, relationship with children. These are all spoken about, if not specifically, but generally in the Quran. It expounds the nature of the universe and determines the position of humanity in this universe, as well as the ultimate objective for humanity. Right? So Islam, one of you tell me, please, what's one of the purposes of humanity in that the Quran emphasizes? Do any of you know? What are the things that the Quran mentions clearly? Yeah, anybody know? What are the objectives of humanity that the Quran emphasizes? So one of them is, so to worship Allah. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I did not create the jinns and the human except to worship me. Okay, that's one objective. Another objective is to be the representative of Allah, the Khalifa. قَالَ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. When he told the angels, I'm going to create a being that will be my representative, my Khalifa on earth. So we are here to do that and to represent Allah, right? And we will receive divine inspiration because of that. So it includes the doctrine. Islam includes the doctrines and practical organizations that emanate from and depend upon his ideal, right? And make of it a reality reflecting upon the everyday life of the human being. So Islam is here to install the rule of Allah upon the life of the human being. Am I making sense so far? Is it? I don't want to make it too technical. Is it okay so far? Yeah, no. Right. So, given that the Islamic conception of life is that of coordination and harmonization between the body and the soul, so the body has rights and the soul has rights, and both of them are to be fulfilled in certain ways. It is only reasonable to expect that a very close relationship should have been established between religion and politics, between the mosque and the place of governance, basically. Okay. What I mean by that is very simple. Islam it tackles the physical aspects of the human being, that he is in need of food, drink, companionship. These are things that are established as a part of our fitrah. But the soul also is tackled in the Quran. Right? وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ, and they ask you about the soul. قُلْ إِنَّ وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. Say that the soul is in the matter of my Lord. So Islam recognizes the human being has this aspect of the soul that also has needs, right? And its contentment is found in worship of Allah and His remembrance. So, based on this logic, if Islam is tackling these issues, then it's reasonable to accept that Islam would tackle the relationship between the church and the mosque and the governance. Okay. So religious activity involves the whole person and the social group. Okay. On the one hand, Islam deals with fullness of humanity as it exists in reality, not treating humanity as an intellectual concept. So Islam recognizes the human being is fluid, that we're not all the same, that to apply rules on everybody would be impractical. So Islam is not idealist, meaning it doesn't wish for a utopia and such, right? It's not this that you can join. No, Islam deals with the hardships of life and its sufferings. Okay. Islam does not deal with propositions of no practical reality. So Islam only tackles with what is real with the human being. So if people say religion has no relevance to today's people and today's problems, but Islam would obviously reject this completely. Okay, Islam does not view the human being as spirit alone or as matter alone. No, they're matter and spirit. Humans are not pure mind, but integrated physical. There's physical elements of the human being. There's a mental element of the human being. There's a spiritual element as well. Okay, whose faculties are part of a unified, functional, and responsible whole. Okay. Islamic social order is based on the universal principle of human brotherhood, and it endeavors to secure happiness. So what Islam is, Wallahu yuridu an yatuba alaykum. Allah wants to forgive you. Allah wants to accept your repentance. So Islam wants happiness ultimately. It wants prosperity for its people, and it wants goodness for both the individual and society. There is absolutely no place for class war of any kind between individual and society in this system. Islam, how does Islam tackle poverty? Does it negate the poor? No. It enforces, obligates zakat on its people. Right? So Islam sees a society as a whole, but has different aspects of how it deals with the different aspects of it when it comes to poverty and wealth and so on. So in its social system, Islam is communal. Islam is it's a congregational religion, right? It prefers a social life. Okay. Now, can you give me examples of how Islam emphasizes community and emphasizes social aspects of worship rather than individualistic rituals? Any examples? Yeah. So Islam encourages Jama'at, known as Salah. Yeah. So the Prophet said that praying in Jama'at is 25, 27 times greater in reward. Jumu'ah is a fard, right? It's a fard. It's not. We can say that Jama'at generally is maybe Sunnah Mu'akkada, but the Jama'at is the Jumu'ah fard is Jumu'ah prayer is fard. Okay, meaning that Islam is emphasizing that you go and you spend time with others. the Prophet ﷺ was asked is, so honoring guests, visiting your brother, that's right. So the Prophet ﷺ was asked, is it better to stay alone or to stay with others in da'wah? And he said, to be with others and to face their hardships and their cruelty and to be patient is better than being alone and secluded. Right? But he did give permission for those who wanted to spend time alone. And like he said, if at the end of time, if people want to escape the fitna, they would spend time alone. And the best place would be just a Muslim herding his sheep on the mountain top without knowing what's happening, because the fitna is so strong. But ultimately, generally, Islam emphasizes being together. Okay, so this is where politics comes in. So a congregation in which every person turns towards one ultimate authority, one direction, with the Kaaba. Okay, we're all Muslims, despite even some of our differences. We're still Muslim, and we face the same way, right? At one center, right? We have one center of the Kaaba in Mecca. We all fast for 1 month at the same time, no matter where we are, whether we're in Australia, China, Britain, Bosnia, wherever we are, we fast that month of Ramadan. Again, emphasizing unity and bringing people together. So performing the pilgrimage to Mecca at the same time is one of the principal duties of all Muslims, one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So again, this is emphasizing being together, coming together, having similar goals and similar objectives, okay, in the religion. But it also places emphasis on strictly personal responsibility. So it doesn't negate that you have obligations also towards yourself. وَإِنَّ بَدَنَكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا, your body, the Prophet said, has a right over you. For example, when the Prophet would enter the house, he would split his timings in the house, and the third, he would give the first right, he would give it to Allah by saying the dua. He'd give his family right by saying salam to them, and he would give his own self the right of praying the two rak'at prayer. Okay. So Islam doesn't negate your personal responsibility, and unfortunately, many of the groups that emphasize politics in Islam nowadays, one of the extremes they might go to, some of them, is emphasis on Khalifa, on common leadership, on ruling with what Allah has revealed, and so on. But many of them negate, unfortunately. And every group has criticism, and all of them are based on ijtihad. Not all of them are the same. Okay, but generally, people who do that, like Hizb al-Tahrir and Dawat Islamiyya, or even Ikhwan, some of them, right? They might emphasize global objectives, but if it comes to their personal, whether they follow the Sunnah or not, and so on, many of them are found lacking in it, right? I know, and it's the same for those who emphasize personal work and negate public life, right? For example, and this isn't a criticism, but Jama'at al-Tabligh, for example, now I gave Hizb al-Tahrir as a political one, and the personal example is Jama'at al-Tabligh. Now, Jama'at al-Tabligh would focus on the person's relationship with Allah, and they would commonly say that if you're praying 5 times namaz, if you're fulfilling your sunnats, if you're doing the tahajjud, if you're doing the tasbihs, if your mu'amalat are correct, the dealings between you and your other fellow human beings are correct, then somehow Allah will help you and Allah will bring victory to the ummah, and so on and so on. But they negate, when the Quran says وَأَنُحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ, the Quran says rule them by what Allah has revealed to you. They negate this, right? And they might not emphasize it too much, right? And this is a criticism of Jama'at al-Tabligh. despite their incredible success, again, because it's based on ijtihad, they might be lacking on that aspect. So what I want to say is, it's important as Muslims that when it comes to groups, that we don't become fully engrossed in any of them, that we follow the good in them, right? And if there's something we feel that they're lacking, we just leave it to it. Either you want to give advice, and probably they won't listen to that advice, and we've probably heard it before, but it's best not to destroy a group. Just leave them as they are. As long as people are doing some good and they're benefiting some kind of aspect in the community, then that's fine. You know, but what the problem is, that, I don't know if you guys know the word ta'assub in Arabic. You know ta'assub? Yeah. Ta'assub is basically being overzealous regarding your group. That my way, or what they call the highway, my way or the highway. So it's either me or nothing, and this is wrong. We should realize all groups are based on ijtihad. They're trying to implement what they think the Quran is saying and what the Sunnah is implying, and they're trying their best in that. And they'll fall, and as all human beings do, they'll fall short in something. Right? But it's best just to help them in what they do good, and maybe advise them if you see something lacking. So Islam also places emphasis on strictly personal responsibility, as I said, right, and the development of the individual, and yet it organizes all individuals into a single whole, the Muslim community. Is that clear? So there's the aspect of the individual, and there's an aspect of the community. Now, people of Tasawwuf, for example, their focus is on the individual, and if we look at the life of the companions, many of them have, and not all of them were fit to be scholars, right? No, the Sahaba, may Allah be pleased with them, not all of them became scholars of Islam, authorities in Islam. Some of them did, some of them didn't, and not all of them made jihad. Some of them did, and some of them didn't. And not all of them memorized the Quran. Some of them did, some of them didn't. Sayyidina Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu would say, if it wasn't for jihad, I would have memorized the Quran. And spreading Islam for him was such a priority that they didn't have time for that. Right? So what I'm saying is, Islam tackles different aspects of the human being and his life, right? So it tackles him as an individual to purify him, because the Prophet ﷺ was sent as a purifier. ليطهر هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم. The Prophet was sent to purify the Sahaba. Okay, but he was also sent to rule with what Allah has brought down and to judge between people. Okay, so in the Sunnah of the Prophet you'll find everything. But Muslims have taken certain aspects of the Sunnah and emphasized it, which is the point. I don't think any group can say that we have encompassed everything. So it is in this context that we must interpret the frequently stated view in Western languages that Islam is not only a religion, but also both a religion and a state. Islam is a religion in terms of the individual, and a state in terms of the community. Any questions so far? No. Is it clear so far, or is there anything that's unclear? Okay. Good. Right, sovereignty, the issue of sovereignty. Sovereignty means who has ultimate authority, who ultimately brings laws down, and who ultimately judges. For secular democracies, it's people, it's the human being. He is the ultimate God in himself, and he is what we base our good and bad on. So if the human beings think it's good, then it's good. If we think it's bad, it's bad. Of course, in Islam, that's that aspect of democracy is rejected. Okay, so Islamic law declares that sovereignty, all authority, belongs to God, belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the creator and he is the legislator. Okay. So the attributes of this sovereignty can be best ascertained from the Quran. Right? We can establish this from the Quran, where reference to God is expressed in terms of that is suggestive of one or other aspects of his sovereignty. تبارك الذي بيده الملك. Blessed or great is the one who in his hands is all dominion. He governs, Allah says, he governs all affairs of the heavens and the earth. Okay. Say, Lord sovereign of all sovereignty, you bestow sovereignty on whom you will and take it away from who you will, who you please. You exalt whoever you will and abase whoever you please. In your hand lies all that is good. You have power over all things. قل اللهم مالك الملك تؤتي الملك من تشاء تنزع الملك ممن تشاء وتعز من تشاء وتذل من تشاء بيدك الخير إنك على كل شيء قدير. So, like several others, these texts have in fact a direct bearing upon the political aspects. They have signified sovereignty as ultimate legal and governmental authority over the universe, life, and humanity. So ultimately, Allah is the one who judges between the universe, and He is the one. He governs life, and He can take it away, and He is the one who controls all of humanity. Okay, He is their sovereign. The Quran also declares that the Prophet of Islam, ﷺ, is not above the law of God. Okay, of course, even as I said earlier, even the Prophet ﷺ was commanded to follow the Sharia. The Prophet ﷺ is commanded accordingly. Say, I'm but a man like yourself. قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ يُوحَى إِلَيَّ أَنَّمَا إِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ. Okay, say, I am but a man like yourselves. It is revealed to me that your God is one God. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَّسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. Another part of the Quran. We sent not a messenger but to be obeyed in accordance to the will of God. So not obeyed in of himself, right? But he is commanded to be obeyed because he is coming from Allah. He is being sent from Allah. Right. So, in the view of these definitions, Muslims have no written constitution to govern, agreed upon by 1.3 billion people of different ethnicities. Right? There's no Islamic constitution that 1.3 billion Muslims with a diversity of ethnicities, of languages, or even of understandings of Islam. There's nothing that 1.3 billion people can bring up and say, we agree upon everything that this book or this paper says. That doesn't exist. Okay. They, however, have in the Quran the unwritten constitution. So in the Quran, there's an unwritten constitution that is agreed upon by all Muslims and governs their daily life affairs to some extent without any law enforcement body. So the Quran exists, it has authority over us, and there are things that we don't need a leader to tell us what to follow of it. So if the Quran says, وَأَدُّوا الْأَمَانَاتِ إِلَىٰ أَهْلِهَا, can you hear me? Anybody else finding a problem? Maybe close the program and start again. Re-upload it, maybe. Check the mics are working and so on. Yeah. Right, so there's part of the Quran where it says, for example, return wealth to its rightful owners. If you borrowed something, return it back. Now, you don't need a ruler to tell you to do that, right? And you can follow the Quran simply by, if you borrow something from someone, return it back and you're fulfilling what the Quran is saying. If the Quran is saying, فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ, will you not stop alcohol? You don't need a ruler to enforce that on you. I mean, you can just decide not to drink this stuff. Now, there are aspects where a ruler is needed. And if you ban alcohol in a community society, you can't do that yourself. You need some sort of personal authority who would implement that, right? In Turkey, for example, when the hijab was banned in public places, common Turks, even if they would disagree with that, they had no power. But when Erdogan came in and became prime minister, now he's president of the country, then he had a free hand at doing that. He went about it. So there are things in Islam which that can be implemented directly from the Quran without legal authority. There are others that you need to be in a position where you to do that. The Quran doesn't rule by itself sometimes, right? So in any particular Muslim state, Muslims could have their constitution written if they wished on the basis of the Quran. And you'll find that in most Muslim countries today, they would have, our rules based on the Quran. I don't know much about Pakistani politics, but I'm sure when I think Amir Khan, when he became president or prime minister, I think he said, I want to rule based on a Medinian methodology or something like that. Yeah. Now, again, if he wants to do that, whether he does or not, that's something else. But if somebody wants to do that, then he can't do that based on just praying 5 times a day in a masjid, attending the local halaqas of ilm, and thinking that will just come about by itself. No, there has to be a position of importance in the society for the Quran to be implemented in that way. Okay. So until they do so, the Quran is a constitution establishing the concept of sovereignty and its relevant issues, as well as the rules that regulate the relationship between all members in a state, between Muslims and non-Muslim states. Some scholars argue that governmental activity is restricted within the limits of the Sharia. Now, they tend to be strict Muslims, right? You have to understand that the Quran does not tackle every nitty-gritty of life. It doesn't. What it does, the Quran, it gives general principles, and we base any ruling on those principles. And if any of you have studied the usul fiqh or anything like that, you'll understand that it's impossible to find every single ruling within the text of Islam, right? But we have certain principles, usul, that whenever a new ruling comes in, we base them on these principles, and if they are found to be okay and not contradictory to any scriptural, sacred law, then we accept it. If it does, then we reject it. So an example of that is traffic lights. Right? Now, those scholars, ISIS, for example, very extreme Khawariji type of group within Muslims, they would say that traffic lights are not part of the Sharia, so they're kufr laws. They actually make this statement. They say, well, and they'll think democracy is a taghut as well. and they'll say you can't have traffic lights. But if any of them followed the four madhabs, they would understand that Islam didn't. Okay, Islam, Allah knew there were going to be cars in the future, right? But He didn't mention it in the Quran. And no scholars say that cars are haram, right? Cars are permissible. So we say that the Quran gives importance to life. That life is more important than anything else. Okay, even if somebody is completely in a position of being starving to death, and he has no other food or drink around him, and if he is inclined and forced to take what is haram, then it becomes permissible, right? Now, when you're driving a car, if you don't have traffic lights, what's going to happen? You know, in crossroads, people are going to crash into each other, and people are going to get killed. So, to implement the principle of life in the Quran, we put traffic lights on the road because life is important. So, what I'm trying to say is the Quran is a constitution for government. But that doesn't mean that that's its only purpose, of course not. And it doesn't mean that the Quran would include every single law that we would require now. So in either case, the government in Islam acts only within the framework of these limitations. Ideally, governance in Islam should only work between what Allah has revealed and the principles He's laid out for us. This principle is a Quranic order expressed in clear words and in positive terms of law, such as do this and do not do that. Okay, sometimes the Quran is just direct in that sense. So in this respect, the Prophet ﷺ himself was not empowered to exceed or overstate. He was commanded to follow. For example, the Quran commands that these are the limits ordained. تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ فَلَا تَعْتَدُوهَا. Such are the commandments and limits ordained by Allah, so do not transgress these limits. وَمَنْ يَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَ اللَّهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. And those who transgress these limits, then they are the unjust people. So in the light of these and similar texts, government in Islam is limited to the ordinance of the law laid down, okay, laid down in the Quran and Sunnah, the primary sources of Sharia. So from this, we can say that the governance in Islam is limited in some ways to follow what the Quran and Sunnah says. Ultimately, that's what we're saying here. It doesn't have free hand in everything, but there are things that Islam would regard as no-go areas, except if the Quran and Sunnah would permit it. Now, continuing on this issue of constitution, now one could argue that the Quran and Sunnah are the sources of fiqh, okay, and the physical aspects of the Sharia. This matter will be detailed later on when I talk about it, but here it is sufficient to remember that fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, is only a personal opinion concerning interpretations of the Sharia. Now, there's a difference really between fiqh and Sharia, right? Sharia are principles Allah has revealed which cannot be moved, okay, such as your God is one, but and cutting of the hand, for example, of the thief, lashing the fornicator, for example. These are part of Sharia. They can't be moved. Okay, but fiqh is opinion. Okay, fiqh is opinion. These are anything which we think of which the Quran doesn't tackle explicitly becomes fiqh. Okay, not Sharia. So Muslims have agreed on the Sharia, of course. We agree on Sharia, but not on the rulings of fiqh. So that's why we have four madhabs of fiqh, because there are rulings which we differ on, but the Sharia in general we can agree on. Right? There's no difference of opinion what the ruling or what the punishment of a thief is. Right? We know that the punishment of a thief is cutting of the hand. Right? So if somebody says no, I disagree, I have a difference of opinion, that isn't really accepted. So the legal implication of this is that government in Islam is bound by a constitution. Like any other government in the world, unless if it's a failure state, right, it has to have some sort of constitution, written or unwritten. But Islam's constitution is divinely inspired, and the Muslim community agrees that this is the case, right? The difference between us and others is that we believe that the Quran and the constitution for Islam is solid and unmovable, and divinely inspired, which is the big difference. Okay, so for me, if I say God told me so, that's a bit different to saying, well, the majority have agreed on this. Yeah, that's different. Especially if that religion that you're referring to is saying that the majority of people will always be corrupt and always will seek ease in matters of deen anyway. So therefore, a government in Islam is not a kind of absolute government. It's not something that has absolute power. It can do whatever it wants. No, that's not the case in Islam. Nor is it's not authoritarian. It's not a dictatorship either. Right? It's not a dictatorship or autocracy either. It is a government limited to a constitution. It's a government, and it's a government in Islam is a government which is limited to a constitution. So scholars of politics maintain that limitation of government power and regulating the affairs of the people is a great principle of the constitutional rule. Right? So and the methods and the means which explain these limitations are called constitutional polity. So in this sense, the Sharia is the constitution. Right? So when we say we want to implement Sharia law, whatever a non-Muslim thinks of that, it is true in a sense, but it's not maybe the way they view it and how it is implemented. But it's definitely the general constitution. But the explanations and the methods that facilitate the application of the constitution are the constitutional polity. So there's a difference between constitution and the constitutional polity. Constitutional polity is how the Sharia is implemented. The constitution is just the Sharia. Okay. So it signifies that authority belongs to Allah alone. However, God does not descend himself to govern, but he sends down his laws to govern. Right? So Allah is not, he does not come down on, he doesn't speak to mankind, and tell them do this and do that. What he did was he sent down, subhanahu wa ta'ala, he sent down the Quran. He sent down his prophet. He sent his prophets as examples for people, and based on them, they are told to govern accordingly. Okay. So here the authority is the law, and the rule is but the rule of law. Okay. So the authority is the law. It's not. The law is there to represent Allah. Is that clear? The law is there to represent Allah. So in Islam, administration and government exist to facilitate the application of law. So the point of having a government in Islam is to apply the hukum, the laws of Allah. That's the point. Isn't to make people richer, to make people's lives easier in terms of being in politics. No. The point of authority in Islam is to apply the rules of Allah. And that's why, Islam emphasizes the importance of a just ruler. And one of the 7 under the shade of Allah is a just ruler. And the Prophet mentioned many times that the just ruler will enter Jannah even without questioning, right? And the corrupt ruler, the one who inflicts injustices upon people, then there's a severe punishment for him. Okay. So, so the duty of government is to facilitate application of the law. That's the point of the government. Okay. So on this basis, a number of scholars, like Sayyid Qutb, maybe some of you have heard of him, are of the view that the government derives its authority not from the party of the people. So this is where we might differ with democracy. They say people have said Qutb, they argue that government derives its authority not from what the majority think, what the majority want, but from the application of the laws of Allah. This is what Sayyid Qutb and scholars like him argue. All of you heard of Sayyid Qutb? Has anybody? Or anyone does not know who he is? Yeah, so he was a key member of the Muslim Brotherhood in the 50s and 60s. The secularization of the Arab world in that time troubled him, and he was very active in writing and speaking against Jamal Abdul Nasser, who was the ruler of his time. And then he was martyred. Of course, he was killed. Hanged, in fact. Okay. But his works still remain with us until today. And no matter what you think about him, I mean, if you get to know him, there are maybe slight issues maybe with some of his tafsir works, but generally he did great work for the Ummah by bringing back the importance of politics in Islam, because the time he came, the Khalifa fell like 30-40 years before, and as westernization of the Muslim world became apparent, it troubled him, and it is still, and he was seen as a threat to to secular Arab government, and that's why the Egyptian government hanged him eventually, sent him to death, and it still troubles people to today. His works in Egypt, he's banned. His books are banned, and any of his followers are in prison. Okay, so I would really suggest you get to read about him and his works. Just as many documentaries Al Jazeera make them, you'll find them on YouTube as well, which really shed the light of democracy in Islam in the 20th, 21st century. So continuing on the constitution, this limitation of government to the law makes the notation of theocracy inapplicable. So there's no theocracy in Islam. In Islamic state, the person or persons at the helm of affairs are not regarded as a specific class. When I say theocracy, I mean hierarchy of class. So in the Islamic state, the person or persons at the helm of affairs are not Alhamdulillah. In Islamic state, the person or persons at the helm of affairs are not regarded as a specific class, divinely elevated or set aside from the common people. So the ruler in Islam is not seen as somebody who is divinely inspired, nor is he any better in the eyes of Allah just because he happens to be a ruler. No, his job is like any other job. It carries responsibilities, and it might get him great rewards or great punishments, depending on how he carries that work out. Okay. So they do not rule in the place of God. This is important. In Islam, the ruler is not there as a replacement for God, no, but merely he or she interprets and apply the law given to them by God, laws which are available and known to all Muslims. They are special neither in themselves nor in the laws they interpret and apply. Now, so their purpose is only to state with what apply with what Allah has revealed. Now, can anyone give me an example of a group of Muslims who would think that these people are divinely inspired? Which we, as I said now, we do not believe. Which group believes that some of their rulers are divinely inspired? Anyone think? Yeah. Okay, good. So the Shia, they're one of the fundamental beliefs, of course, something usul al-din, is Imam. They believe that the family of the Prophet ﷺ, and that came from Fatima radiallahu anha, some of them, 12 of them only, I don't know why 12, but 12, are somehow divinely inspired, and they're Imams, both in spiritual and in governance. That's why they would differ with us when it comes to the Khilafah of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. They would say that the Sahaba stole the Khilafah of Ali, because Ali radiallahu anhu, he is divinely inspired, and that's the problem. And also this aspect of Usma is also a problem, right? Why could it be a problem? Because if Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, who we believe to be not Masum, but if he was to come with a law that would contradict maybe the Prophet of Allah, would we take his laws? No, right? Or any of the companions, right? So this is an important aspect that we might differ with the Shia on. We say that no one, after when the Prophet passed away, Sharia, the sacred law was implanted, that it cannot be changed. Sharia was put in place. And the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, when they made mashwara, and they agreed that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu would become the Khalifa, how did they do that? They did that through mashwara, yeah? Through mashwara. Now, the Quran doesn't necessarily talk about how you choose a leader, but mashwara is emphasized. وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. So this is an example of how the Sahaba would interpret the Quran's principles and apply it to them in government. Right? So they said, okay, let's do mashwara, because mashwara is a good thing in the Quran. And that's what they did, and they came out with that result. The Shia, of course, they would regard the Imams as completely infallible and divinely inspired governors. Okay, but we say no. We say they do not rule in the place of God, of course, and we agree on this actually. But merely they interpret and apply the law of God. We believe. But the Shia would disagree and say no. They have their direct divine inspiration, and of course for them the Imams are higher than prophets in status. So we say they're not special in themselves, they're just normal human beings. The Shia would say no, they're divinely inspired Imams, nor in the laws they interpret and apply. Just because they make an interpretation doesn't mean it's right. It could be right, it could be wrong. And the famous hadith the Prophet said, if a ruler makes a judgment, if he's right, he gets 2 rewards. If he's wrong, he gets 1 reward. Okay, so it's based on ijtihad. So from what we've talked about, we can come out maybe with 4 things. Okay. The system of government in Islam is, I think, compatible with democracy. And both systems contain substantial elements of similarity. The only aspect of we would disagree with democracy is when it comes to who has ultimate sovereignty. If you say God has ultimate sovereignty, but people can choose the laws that people are wanting to implement, but these laws will not contradict sacred law, how could that contradict Islam? The difference between the two, I feel, is that usually interpreted on a religious basis also supports those elements which are similar to democracy. So I would like to see it that way, that democracy has things that Islam encourages, right? And if you want to take it as mashwara, seeking counsel, then that's, I guess you can do that, right? And I don't know if any of you have heard the Sheikh Diddu is a famous, well-known, great scholar, a modern contemporary scholar from Mauritania. So he has lectures on this, and this is what he argues. Also, we can conclude that government in Islam is constitutional. Right? Government in Islam is constitutional. It's not based on what the ruler thinks, but it's based on the Quran. It's based on the Sunnah. It's based on the Islamic government is not theocratic or autocratic. Okay, it's not there to serve certain types of people. It's not also there to tell people what to do without any question. Okay, they're liable to questioning. They're liable to judgment, and they're not divinely inspired. And changes in the form of government will not change the Islamic identity of the state. And this is an important aspect. Just because the government changes, the ruler changes, shouldn't mean that Islam, that the government changes. Changes in the form of government will not change the Islamic identity of the state. Just because the government changes doesn't mean that the state moves away from Islam. It shouldn't do that, because rules are not based on governments, they're based on Sharia. So as long as the government facilitates the ordinance of the law, then it's fine. As long as it serves that purpose, then that's why it's there for. Now I want to ask a question. Going back, we believe the cutting of the hand is in the Quran, right? We believe that lashing of the adulterer is in the Quran. We believe that the eye for the eye concept for the death penalty is there. If a ruler says, I do not want to apply it, he says, for example, I believe in it, but I do not want to apply it. Do you guys think that this ruler will leave Islam, or will he remain a Muslim? So he says, I believe in it, but I do not apply it. What do you guys think? Will he remain a Muslim, or will he leave Islam? Anybody else? Yeah, so he remains a Muslim because it's like Salah, isn't it? I mean, if you believe Salah is part of Islam, it's one of the 5 pillars, and it's there, you have to establish it, but you don't pray, you don't leave Islam. You don't leave Islam, you remain a Muslim. And so the same thing here. Now, that people like ISIS and a Khawarij type of people, they would say, if you don't apply the rule of Allah, because they believe that I don't know if ISIS specifically say this, but the Khawarij historically would believe that a kabira would take you out of Islam. So they would say, if you don't apply the rules of Allah, then you become a kafir. So now, can anyone think of an example of the Khulafa of the Prophet not implementing the rule of Allah in something out of a certain objective, because of a reason? Any reason, any example at all? I can think of one. Anything? Right, so I can think of that where Umar radiallahu anh, during his Khilafah, during his Khilafah, there was a year of the drought, right? There was a year where no rain fell on Medina. Yeah, okay. So during the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anhu, a year came where there's no water and people were starving, right? And people were really suffering poverty and hardship. So people started to steal to eat, right? To stay alive. Did Umar radiallahu anh implement the cutting of the hand? No. He said, the people are desperate. They're going, they will take means to survive. And I'm not going to punish them for that. So he lifted that punishment. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that Umar radiallahu anh didn't believe in the hukum, the rule of Allah. Of course not. But he found it inapplicable at that time. See, this is where there is some sort of leeway when it comes to governance in Islam, that the ruler does have a say in things. Now, many scholars argue now, and I think Sheikh Abduladim is one of them. And if any of you have heard of Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, I think I read a quote from him that he believes this as well, that to implement penal punishments now in the 21st century, you would see an exodus of Muslims, right, that would leave Islam. Right. So he says that to implement them now would see that many Muslims would leave Islam because they would see it as a harsh religion, and they wouldn't, Now, whether you agree with that or not, he's not saying that that's not the hukum or rule of Allah. He's not saying that, but he's saying that the modern world is about acceptance. Generally, it's about free will. About people can choose what they want to do. Now, and people are used to that, even in the Muslim world. So if you want to come now and tell people that if you want to leave your religion, we're going to kill you, and that law exists in books of fiqh. I mean, to deny the apostasy laws would be ridiculous. Of course they exist. But do you see where they're coming from, though? Because what do you want at the end of the day? Do you want guidance for people? Do you want them to turn away? Now, that school of thought will say, no, I want guidance for people. I don't want them to turn away. I want people coming into Islam and accepting the religion. But at the same time, we don't want to water down the religion. Is that clear? We don't want to water it down where it becomes unrecognizable. So I mean, Hizb al-Tahrir will say, and a lot of Muslims actually would say, that it doesn't matter what people think, as long as the rule of Allah is implemented, most people believe anyway. Well, it's an interesting debate. Have any of you involved yourselves in a debate like that, or heard anything, or want to make an argument? Yeah. Yeah, so exactly. So it comes down to understanding the viewpoints of people. It comes down to understanding the context of where you are, and how, what are the perspectives of people of life, right? Um, as I said, you want people to enter the religion. You don't want to turn them away, and that's our purpose, right? When we teach Islam, and we don't. If you tell a Western person now that Islam teaches, I mean, even in the book of fiqh, right? I'm not going to lie. It talks about, for example, homosexuality is a common topic nowadays. The books of fiqh talk about people like muhannath, the people who are more probably called transsexuals now, people who are men but act like women, and vice versa. Books of fiqh say really harsh things about them and the punishment they would suffer in an Islamic state. Now, if you're going to just openly admit that and say, and this is what I believe also. No, I'm not going to even try and say that that's not applicable. I'm going to defend it. You'll just turn people away. That's a fact. We don't live in a time where, in medieval, for example, in medieval times where killing and battles. We live in modern societies where we mix with different ethnicities, mix now with each other. There's a common understanding that we can all agree on. So to say that and to defend it, never mind whether you're arrested. I'm not even talking about whether you'll be arrested. Even in America, you can say whatever you want. It's a much more liberal society. But if you argue that, you'll be rejected mostly. Now, is that for the benefit of the religion for people to reject it? I mean, one of the things to remember is that the Sahaba, the laws that came to them was later on, like forbidden the prohibition of alcohol. The Salah itself took many years for it to come in place. Why? Because Islam saw the guidance and hidayah of people as a priority before anything else. And if you implement this and that now, would people accept it? That's questionable. I certainly view it that way. If somebody asks me, because I work as an Imam here, if somebody was to ask me, and many non-Muslim groups come and visit the mosque, and I give them a tour, and they would say, "Do you believe that you should kill, or you should, I don't know, cut the hand of a thief?" I say that these laws were given at a time where those types of rulings were common, right? But I think generally Islam first off, these laws were hardly implemented, and they're more of a deterrent rather than anything else. Right? But I would always claim that I believe in it. Of course, I mean, it's in the Quran. The thief and the man or woman cut their hand. I'm not going to deny that ayah. But I will say that I do not believe that at this time, in 2019, where the understandings of people are differ from 100 years ago, that I would apply that. Okay. But anyway, I see the arguments. So anyway, the functions of a state. I have to apologize because I'm a bit ill this morning, and that's why I'm a bit slow trying to explain things. In Islam, the state is not an end in itself. So the point here is the state isn't everything in Islam. It's only there as a means to interpret and to apply what Allah has revealed. That's all it is. Okay, it's a means to apply, not the end. To apply justice, to apply freedom, to implement equality among people. Right? No, there's no difference between rich and poor. In the Islamic State, God is the ultimate source of governance, right? So God is the ruler. He has legal authority, which is a blessing in itself, because in a secular democracy where man is God, then who defines what's good and bad at the end of the day? The West are only good and they only view things a certain way because of their Christian heritage. But traditionally, they never viewed things like that. Right? They never viewed Islam. And I think when we move on more and more, as we become more secular, more atheistic, the rulings of Allah rules will become further complicated. Right? Because 100 years ago, homosexuality was seen as a mental illness, right? And it wasn't accepted at all. But now it is. Now, who knows what's going to happen in the future? So if you don't have, my point is, if you don't have a legal authority which is a higher power than a human being, it becomes very dangerous. In other words, the Sharia is the foundation of legislation. The government in Islam is specifically designed to implement the law, that is, to govern with justice, according to the law. There is no place in the Islamic system for arbitrary rule by a single individual or group, because there is always room for shura. So Islam is not, as I said, not a dictatorship. Umar radiallahu anhu stood at the pulpit, beginning of his khilafah, and he said, what would you do if you saw me do something wrong? And a man stood up and he said, and he pointed to his sword and he said, we'll correct you with our swords. Right? So there's no such thing as one-man government in Islam. Right? There's shura. There is the aspect of shura. So based on a consensus of Muslims, the sovereignty of God will be implemented by implementing his laws. By showing that Allah is the true sovereign, that He is the true owner of this universe, we implement His laws. Okay. And that's why people would argue implementations of these laws, because they would say if you don't, then you're doing some sort of shirk by assuming that you have power. This is what Muslims have agreed upon. God's wisdom did not empower anybody, or even the Prophet ﷺ, to legislate for the people as he wishes or govern them on the basis of his own authority. Again, the command to follow what Allah has revealed, and no one has free will in governance. So, as political theory in Islam is completely based on the confession of faith, or the idea of one God, therefore the one who confesses that divinity belongs to none but God, and thereby confesses that sovereignty is in human life, the political theory belongs to God alone. So once we submit to La ilaha illallah, then ultimately any rule has to be based on the rule of Allah. So God exercises sovereignty in human life, on the one hand by directly controlling human affairs by His will, and on the other hand by establishing the fundamental order of human life, human rights, duties, relationships, and mutual obligations by His law and His program. So this affirmation means that there is nobody who can be associated with God, neither in His will nor in His laws and program. These essential principles are slightly based on numerous Quranic verses, of which the ones discussed earlier are sufficient. Okay, so it's Allah that judges what is sacred in human life, human rights. He is the one that talks about human duties and relationships and mutual obligations. And on the one who does not go by them, then is he a believer of Allah or not? Right? So in the early period of the Muslim community, the early period of Islam, the prophetic leadership, the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he provided authority according to the peculiar circumstances of the time. So he ruled for how many years? He was a state ruler for 13 years. Yeah, 13 years. The Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was a political leader. For his successors, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam he passed away, but the sovereignty of God continues to exist as a reality. Can you remember a quote a Sahabi said which illustrates that okay, the Prophet has passed away to the next life, but God remains? Can you remember a quote a Sahabi said? I can think of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh. Whoever was worshipping Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then he should remember that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has passed away. But whoever is worshipping Allah, then Allah is and if whoever is worshipping Allah, then Allah is alive and will never die. So, and also the ayat which was revealed, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ رُسُلٌ أَفَإِنْ مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ انقلبتم على أعقابكم. The Prophet is only a messenger. Ultimately, that's the truth. Greatest of all of Allah's creation, the greatest human being that will ever set foot on earth, and so on, right? Unlike any other human being, but ultimately a messenger of God, and somebody who was not destined to be in this dimension forever. Where did I stop? Yeah. So in the sphere of their competence, they became successors. The Sahaba became the successors of the Prophet ﷺ. But for them, there was no possibility of receiving divine revelations. Hence, their power in the matter of legislation was restricted, specifically that they had no authority to abrogate the Sharia. The Sharia, of course, was laid down. Allah says, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. During the pilgrimage, the ayah was revealed, and that was the last verse concerning rulings in Islam. Today I have, in Surah Ma'idah, today I have completed your religion, and I have become pleased for Islam as being your religion. Yeah. So Islam is the religion of Allah until the Day of Judgment. And the Sahaba had, of course, and we don't believe they had the authority to change the Sharia. Of course not. The Sharia, however, gives them the right to interpret it, okay, and to take from it whatever to facilitate the application of the Sharia in their daily life. So again, one of the Shia, they argue, they say, how could the Prophet, how could he pass away without leaving, without leaving a wasiyah, without leaving a ruler after him, right? And we say that the Sahaba weren't left clueless. The Prophet, his whole life they spent with him. They saw him and they knew his methodology, and the wisdoms of the Prophet was that he left them to it because he left them with everything, right? And they realized that whether that's through mashwara, whether that's through like Umar radiallahu anhu, if he's picked 10 people to be after him, and two the most pious, most reliable people after him, he realized that pious people were given preference by the Prophet. So he used that methodology. Whether that's through mashwara, like وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ, one of the characteristics of true believers is that they do mashwara amongst themselves. So they use these principles to apply it to themselves. So it's not true what they argue, the Shia, that they were left helpless. No, they were left with the Quran and Sunnah, which they would apply for themselves. Yeah. And they would interpret from the Quran and Sunnah whatever it takes to facilitate the application of the Sharia in their life. So, in modern constitutional theory, okay, in terms of terminology, the first Khalifa is called the Chief Executive. He was entrusted with the administration of the affairs of the community. Right? He was instructed. He was given responsibility over the community, whether that's political, economic, security, and others. Now, I've given a list of examples here, two actually. Many. Yeah, where the Khalifas would interpret the laws of Allah, right, and they would apply them. Okay, so the role of the Islamic State here is to facilitate the economic, political, and security aspects of the community. So the circumstances of the time, the four successors necessitated the establishment of two institutions: the police force, right? So Abu Bakr set up the police force, right? People who patrol Medina to maintain internal law and order. Right? Now, the ISIS, and therefore they would say no, the police are kufur, taghut. They argue this is false. Okay? Just because the Quran doesn't say police, shurta, whatever in Arabic, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The Quran talks about security, importance of security. Okay, and one of the punishments Allah can inflict on a community is actually fear and insecurity. Like Allah speaks in Surah that disbelieved, and Allah says, فَأَذَاقَهُ اللَّهُ لِبَاسَ الْجُوعِ وَالْخَوْفِ. Allah made them taste the fear in their society because of what the transgressions and of going against the hukm of Allah. Okay. So the Khalifas set up a police force. They made sure a professional army was there to maintain security from external threats. Again, the Quran doesn't speak about setting up an army, right? But Umar radiallahu anh set up an army, and he gave them a wage, and there was a fixed time of how long they can go for and come back. And one of the known stories, what he used to do, he would ask the women, their wives, and he would say, how long can you survive without your husband? Not survive, but how long would you be satisfied without your husband? And they said 4 months. So he commanded the army of men, they would come back after 4 months. Okay. The first four Khalifas also exercised judicial power, but in doing so consulted learned individuals. Now the ruler and the scholar are different, and of course the Sahaba were scholars from the first four Khalifas. Of course they were scholars, but later on it becomes more relevant where Islam became the rulership became part of dynasties rather than like the Umayyads and Abbasids. And many of them who were born and to become leaders, they weren't scholars. Many of them were corrupt. Many of them were pious, but not necessarily scholars, right? So to implement them, they said to implement justice, it couldn't be carried out by corrupt rulers, right? And many of the many of the Abbasids later on, and many of the later Umayyads were. So with the passage of time, the caliphs delegated their judicial functions to eminent judges. So it moved away from the state in that sense, right? It moved away from the state and became independent, which is a good thing. Who were respected by the caliphs and who usually acted independently, right? In short, the main objective of the executive, the main Khalifa, legislator and judiciary was to facilitate the application of Islamic law so as to administer complete justice and equality among all people. So the purpose, these judges, these rulers, was to implement justice in the community and ensure equality amongst people, for all people, and ensuring security from internal and external threats. Now, mashwara. Is that an example? Is that an example of the time of Abu Bakr and Umar, the Khalifas, where they would seek mashwara from their companions regarding things in Islam that became important? Any example where the caliphs sought mashwara with certain important things? How about when the Quran, in the Battle of Yamama, during the Battle of Abu Bakr, at the time of Abu Bakr, how many? 70 of the Hufad were killed, martyred. So Zayd ibn Thabit radiallahu anhu, who was the scribe of the Prophet sallallahu, he came to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and he said to him, no, sorry, he didn't come. Sorry, just a bit slow. Right. Umar radiallahu anhu came to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and he said to him, you need to write, script the Quran, because the Hafadha they're reducing by being martyred in the battlefield. So please, write down the Quran because we don't want to lose it. Now, Abu Bakr firstly refused. He said this is not something the Prophet did himself, and but Umar said no, but it's good. It has benefit. And he was encouraged until Abu Bakr said, I saw that Umar was telling the truth, and I ordered Zayd ibn Thabit to start writing down the Quran. So that's an example of mashwara, of during the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, during the Battle of Ridda, where the tribes of Arabia started to leave Islam. What did Abu Bakr do? He wanted to fight them because they started to stop paying the zakat. They said the zakat was only obligatory to us during the Prophet's time. It doesn't apply to us anymore. And he consulted the rest of his companions, and they said, no. Even Umar radiallahu anhu said, do you fight them? Are you going to fight them? And they say, La ilaha illallah, they're Muslims. And Abu Bakr said, I can't, even if they say they're Muslim, if they're stopping the zakat, I'm going to fight them. And Umar kept going. He said, أتقاتلهم وهم يقولون لا إله إلا الله. Are you going to fight them? And they say La ilaha illallah. And Abu Bakr said, yes. He said, is the religion going to decrease in my time? No, I don't. I will never allow it. And then the hadith, which is in Bukhari, Umar radiallahu anhu said that I finally, my heart opened and I saw that the truth manifested in the speech of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. So these are examples of when the Sahaba would implement this consultation process, shura. Okay. So the political system in Islam can be understood as a consultative rule, that is, ruled by the shura. Okay, it's not an authoritarian state at all. It shouldn't be like that. Okay. The Quran commands Muslims to take their decisions after consultation, both public and other matters. فبما رحمة من الله لنت لهم ولو كنت فظا غليظ القلب لانفضوا من حولك فاعف عنهم واستغفر لهم وشاورهم في الأمر. The Prophet ﷺ is commanded in Surah Ali Imran to say, to be soft towards the Sahaba, and Allah says if you weren't soft towards them, they would have ran away from you. Okay, but so forgive them, ask Allah to forgive them, pardon them, and ask them for counsel, ask their opinion. The name of the Sahabis ran away from my head, but during Badr, the Prophet ﷺ aligned the camps of the Muslims at a certain place, and a companion came to him and he said, is this from Allah or your own personal ijtihad? He said, this is my opinion. The Sahabi said, I know a place where it's better. And he said, if we camp next to the wells, we can kill them off by by limiting the water resource to them. So he did that. Again, that's mashwara. Again, or Khandaq, even Khandaq, it was a Sahabi that suggested that they build a trench around Medina. So the Quran commands Muslims to take their decisions after consultation. And once we've done mashwara, then we are told, once you've made your decision, then to do tawakkul on Allah and trust in Him, and inshallah Allah will put khair in it. One of the things that, of course, Jama'at Tabligh teach, which is very good, is this mashwara thing, that no decision should be made without mashwara. So this makes consultation mandatory by virtue of it being the subject of a direct Quranic command as specific as those requiring obligatory prayers and zakat. So mashwara is in some ways obligatory, like the salah and zakat is. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even with his exceptional quality of being divinely guided, always consulted his companions and representatives of the tribes of his adherents before taking decisions. Okay. So he would always seek the opinions of tribes, people he trusted, people who had knowledge. He'd ask them. His successors were no less faithful defenders of the consultative institution. So even the companions, as I said earlier, even they continued the sunnah of mashwara after him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So in this respect, the Sharia does not confine consultation to the religious sphere, nor does it provide a specific form or detailed procedures of consultation. What I mean is, the Sharia isn't there to tell people to do mashwara just on aspects of deen. Anything in life, anything, even dunya, marriage, whether we should divorce, whether we should take part in a business transaction, business deal, whether we should go out in this time or go. Everything should be done with mashwara, right? So this is, again, there is an aspect of democracy in this, right? Of asking opinions, and even if the majority say something, the Prophet said, "La tajtami'u ummati ala dalalah." My ummah can never gather upon deviancy. Now that's generally understood to be the salaf, but it could be understood generally also. If the majority of Muslims are saying one thing, right, and they're good Muslims, isn't that compatible to just trust that decision? Yeah. So in this respect, the Sharia does not confine consultation to the religious sphere. It's not just religion, nor does it provide a specific form. So it doesn't say how to do mashwara. This is interesting, right? This is the answer to this democracy question. It doesn't say how you do consultation. If you want, you can ask the nation for their opinion. And if you want, you can ask 6-7 people only, right? So the answer to that for me seems like mashwara and democracy are very close together. Okay, and just because Hizb ut-Tahrir, people like that might disagree, I say as long as the sacred laws of Allah are implemented, we cannot, are emphasized at least or believed in, then I do not see how, and you can say that democracy and mashwara, it cannot be the same. Okay? It's just asking the opinion of people. Right? The Sharia left the door open for Muslims to choose the method most suitable to their circumstances in time and place. Is that clear? The Sharia, this is, if you don't know it, if you don't come out with this, then you can come out with this sentence. The Sharia left the door open for Muslims to choose the method most suitable to their circumstances in time and place. Now, people who argue against democracy, they'll say, well, how can you give a jahil an opinion? How can you take his opinion seriously? How could you give him the right to speak on public matters? Now, that is true, but in modern times, the internet provides all types of information, and there's no excuse for ignorance anymore. So you can say that if I was going to ask the whole nation about who should become the next leader, these people can research the leader, and they can research the nominee, right? And they can say, you know, I think he would apply the laws of Allah better. You know, how about that? Right. So I say here that the deliberate silence of the Sharia about the form of shura is suggestive of the need for continuous temporal legislation. We're always in need of temporal legislation. Some things might work now, might not work. Might not, right? Might have worked in 1900s, but might not necessarily work in 2019-20. This legislation would relate to administration and other affairs not touched upon by the Sharia, as well as the affairs for which the Sharia has provided only broad basic principles with no detailed laws. Again, this is saying that there are things in Sharia the Sharia does not touch, nor does it talk about. It doesn't, but if it does, sometimes it talks about vaguely. Now, you can apply democracy here and accept the laws of democracy when it comes to the aspects Sharia is quiet about. Now, this, of course, is not what the laws that Sharia talks about, right? If the Sharia says something, that's something else. But if it stays quiet about it, why not use democracy? So this is my answer to it is yes, democracy and Islam and the Islamic method of rule can definitely be compatible. When it comes to rules and rulings, which the Sharia does not emphasize. In either case, it is upon it is up to the people to judge basically legal opinions, what they need of detailed legislation through independent reasoning. So through ijtihad, we can come out with relatively good legislation, which the Sharia doesn't talk about, through ijtihad. And this is also must be in agreement with the spirit of the Sharia. So again, ijtihad should be carried by those who are qualified to make ijtihad, because they will make it upon the Quran and Sunnah, the principles of usul al-fiqh, and it wouldn't go against what the Sharia is basically saying and what's its teaching, the spirit of it. It is quite clear that legislation cannot be it cannot contradict the Sharia. Is that clear? The legislation, even if it's done through ijtihad, should not contradict the Sharia. But otherwise, it's okay. As to the legislative power of the state, the early period of Islam preserved a variety of examples. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself was. Do you want to say something? Yeah. Again, what I just said is my personal opinion. This is what I think, just based on my reading and what I think is best. I might change for later on in my life. I don't know, but this is what I think. Just being a West, born here, lived here, know how the system works here. Being a student of knowledge, I've gained that some sort of knowledge in Islam. This is themes that if we would answer in this way, we'd get more accepted. This I think would please Allah first off, which is the most important thing, and it would make sense. It just wouldn't make sense to people. Okay, so the early period of Islam preserved a variety of examples. So there are examples. For example, Muhammad ﷺ himself was consulting his Arab and non-Arab companions before deciding on matters not touched by the Sharia. Okay, so there are things in the Sharia which isn't talked about, and the Prophet ﷺ asked consultation. This is my proof. This is what I'm using. So among the thousands of examples that abound is the view of both Abu Bakr radiallahu and Umar radiallahu about the prisoners of the war of Badr. Right? He asked them, what should we do with these prisoners? Submitting the matter to the Muslims and taking their advice, the Prophet ﷺ demonstrates that he wants the people to share freely in the decision. Now, whether he allowed it for Abu Bakr and Umar only is not relevant to me. I think the fact that he left it open to discussion, whether that's to 2 or 3 people or 1,000 or 1,000,000 people, the fact that he left it open is proof that people do have a say. People do definitely have a say. The Prophet ﷺ demonstrates that he wants the people to share freely in the decision. This also was allowed by his successors in varying styles and forms, these examples, however, are not compulsory, and none of them require that the Muslim community must conform. So I'm not saying that these are limiting examples and we have to do them as they were doing it, but what I'm saying is the general principle of this is that things were left for discussion. Okay, and whether you want to implement the discussion through a voting booth or a debate, whatever, Islam does allow, there's what we call in Arabic fusha, there is a space for that. Sorry. Okay, so similarly, the claim that God is the only legislator does not make the Islamic system against democracy, where the people legislate for themselves. Right? Just because we believe Allah is the legislator, it doesn't mean that when we come up with these legislations that and the Sharia doesn't touch upon that, I'm making myself as the Sharia. No. Okay. The final slide. This is because of the fact that the Sharia did not give detail on everything in this life, of course, but kept silent on some issues, like the Prophet said. Allah made things clear. He didn't mention some things to make things easy for you, including the method of consultation, how we do mashwara. He didn't talk about it. Allah didn't mention it, and other matters at the heart of the structures and functions of the state, and between the state and its subject. These things are not touched upon in detail. Between the subjects themselves, how we deal with rulers, how rulers deal with us as people who have no position, and between the state and other states in the world community. So there's general principles, but like we don't give walaya to non-Muslims. But generally, it's left open how we deal with ourselves, with governments. It's left open. Okay, so that's. I hope I've tried to answer the question. I've got 10 more slides, but it's just not going to happen in 3 minutes. So hopefully you've found this quite interesting, that you've understood what I was trying to say, that it wasn't maybe too complicated or irrelevant, but hopefully I've tried to make it clear. So, yeah. Is that fine? Oh, fine. But what do you mean worrying? Yeah. That's why Muslims need to wake up and realize their responsibilities of da'wah and conveying Islam properly in a way that makes sense to people. Once we make Islam make sense, which it does, then people will leave that way, because you have to understand, Westerners don't have any other option. They've rejected democracy, right? And Islam isn't presented like it is, like here I've tried to explain it. Muslims are just shouting, and we're very defensive, unfortunately, without maybe explaining Islam and how it can help them rather than make things more difficult for them. Once we do that, inshallah, then they'll accept it. Anyway, so may Allah give us tawfiq to understand. Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. But anyway, you'll probably meet other Muslims and they'll say I'm talking nonsense, but this is what I've read from scholars and what makes sense. So that's it. Just give